Okay, so we're going to go back to a series of speakers tonight. We've adjusted the schedule a little bit. Randy Benson, who's been here videotaping, was going to go now and show some excerpts from his film, but we'll save that till later for the movie night. And we're going to insert somebody we missed this morning, Doug Valentine. And what Doug's going to talk about, and he'll be coming in remote, is the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and the assassination of JFK. And he's the author of 5 books, and his new book, The Strength of the Pack, is an expose of the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Agency. His previous book, The Strength of the Wolf, about the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, devotes a chapter to the possible drug trafficking aspects of the JFK assassination. And in his second book, The Phoenix Program, Valentine revealed that members of a U.S. Army military intelligence group may have taken photographs of the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King and the assassins themselves. Valentine worked as an investigator for Dr. William Pepper and also testified in Memphis in the 1999 trial of King versus Jowers, the civil trial brought by King's family. And so that's who's going to talk to us next as soon as we get into the computer and hook it up. Can you see them on there?
No,
Nobody. Joe comes back and they'll call him and he'll start up. We're going to have a series of speakers then for a little bit, and at some point we're going to try and add in an additional speaker who contacted me late, Russ Baker, who spoke last year and has done a lot of work on the Bush family. We'll see if we get him tonight or tomorrow. And then we have, again, films, for movie night. When we're done with the speakers, we'll take a little break. There's hot cookies and cold milk downstairs till 10, and then we can come back up and try to figure out some movies. Unless everybody's going to make me answer questions all night again, but I'm not talking about 9/11.
No building 7.
Yeah, building 7, building 3, building 6, building 2, none of it.
It's a deal. It's a deal.
Anything else is fair game, but well, I'm an apostate in the middle of a religion.
Yeah. That guy never showed up today.
I hope I didn't disappoint him.
He may not want to answer.
What about Chappaquiddick?
Go ahead, ask me.
I was just going to ask if we kind of have a good feel of what happened in Chappaquiddick.
Well, I think the evidence, and Bob Cutler did work on this, and Holcomb Heston, a number of the researchers looked at it in detail. I did as well. You have a couple different elements that were going on, but the overarching one is that Nixon's political opponents in that election were being eliminated, whether it's the Bremer shooting of Wallace or, the Chappaquiddick incident, and so that's the framework. The hard evidence shows that Kennedy was not in the car that went into the water. I don't go into that in detail, but basically he was not driving the car and he was not in the car. The evidence also shows that Mary Jo Kopechne did not die of drowning or asphyxiation alone, but that she had some kind of a wound in the back of her neck that bled down all sides of her blouse. But by the time the lab came back with that, she was already buried, and a lawyer came to help the family named Blatchford, who convinced them not to reinter her and look any further at the evidence.
The implication is that she died from a wound.
Well, or at least the wound disabled her until they could get her into the water, and she died with her head in the footwell and her back up the seat and her legs sticking back over the seat, so kind of this way. Clearly awake enough, she was trying to get at what was left of the air, and she didn't really drown. She died of asphyxiation in the air pocket. But it's very difficult to get out of a submerged car, and the door on Kennedy's side was smashed in and not movable, and the window wasn't down or accessible, and so he just wasn't in the car. I think that he was removed and drugged and removed, slipped a Mickey or something at the party, and then taken back to the hotel. He wakes up at 4 a.m. in dry clothes and stumbles down confused to the clerk's desk and asks what time it is, and goes back up. I talked to people in Martha's Vineyard who were there at the time, and they said they'd seen him that morning in a jovial mood at a bed and breakfast, reading the paper, talking to friends. He didn't know anything had happened until they come to him and tell him that this woman was dead in the car. She's interesting, Mary Jo, because she worked for Senator Smathers. And she was part of this traveling group of women called the Boiler Room Girls, which included, among others, Judy Woodruff, and a lot of the ones that were at the party, and they were like kind of political secretaries that moved around, ones that were at the Chappaquiddick party that night rose up afterwards into top law firm positions and top media positions, and were basically, I felt, kind of paid off. Mae Brussel, the researcher that was a mentor to me, was tracking all of these people all the time because there was crossover between the Kennedy assassination, Watergate, and all of that period in Nixon. And she actually called Mary Jo Kopechne's parents 3 days before Chappaquiddick and said, they're going to kill your daughter. In Smathers' office, Kopechne worked she lived with one of his secretaries, other secretaries, and also knew another employee. And that employee was Carol Tyler, who had been the personal secretary to Bobby Baker in the Baker scandal with LBJ, and she disappeared in a plane in Alaska, similar to Hale Boggs, Carol Tyler. Another secretary that was working there at the time had been one of Jack Ruby's strippers. She was in a position to know a great deal. She was the last person allowed to see the Robert Kennedy police files before they were locked up.
Do you remember her name?
Mary Jo.
Oh.
I'm talking about Mary Jo now.
Mary
Carol Tyler dies in the crash, but Mary Jo, you know.
Jack Ruby's stripper.
Oh no, I don't remember the name of the stripper, but I just wrote and I read it at the. Yeah. And so she knew quite a bit, and she, you know, I think that for whatever sets of reasons, she was put in a position of compromising Kennedy, wittingly or not. And then they had him over a barrel, I think, because they presented evidence that she was blackmailing him, which is probably fake, but they said, do you want a murder charge or a manslaughter charge? And if they had killed another Kennedy at that point, I don't think the country would have withstood, you know, the shock and not demanded the truth. So they had to eliminate him some other way, which was to discredit him with this incident. But the judge at the end of the inquest turns to the Kennedy table and says, you're all lying through your teeth. This story of him diving and calling Markham and them diving is all concocted.
Do you have any impression of how the car got into the water with her in?
It was-
Did she actually drive it?
No.
No.
It was, I think she was stabbed, put into the car. Deputy Look saw the car outside of Puget Pond at midnight, well after he left the party, sitting on the side of the pond. So I think, you know, there was this ambush, basically. Kennedy's taken off and dumped dead drunk in the hotel, and then Mary Jo is stabbed and thrown into the car. And the lawyer that showed up to help her parents and convince them not to reinter the body, this guy Blatchford, was the CIA guy who penetrated the Peace Corps. And so when a lawyer shows up for you to help you, think twice. You know, I have an old cartoon of two guys in pinstripe suits in the jail, and the one guy says, what'd you do? And the other guy says, I hired a lawyer. You know, especially in these kind of cases. So there was a lot of politics to it, and a lot of what she knew, and I think she was murdered, and then he was framed and put in a position where he took the rap. He didn't say anything about it in the last book, but the Kennedys are not in much of a position to tell the truth because they kept threatening the kids and they kept, you know, pushing them in different ways. But that's pretty much, I mean, you know what, yeah, Mike.
Why do you think they picked her? Mary Jo Kopechne?
I think that she was basically coming out of the other camp and was compromising Kennedy, and they were using her both to, you know, spy on him and then possibly she didn't know she was setting him up or herself up, you know, to take him out of the party.
I mean, why did they pick her in particular? Is there a reason, or just a question of picking somebody?
Well, I was giving her background. Were you here for that? I mean, that she worked with Smathers, and she worked with Carol Tyler, Bobby Baker's secretary. She worked with one of Ruby's strippers in Smathers' office. She was part of these boiler room girl traveling secretaries. But coming out of Smathers' office, who was tight with the old man, Joe Kennedy, and the mob, but had no dealing, he didn't like the brothers, I think that she was planted in there and played that role. Why did they pick her to, rather than another one? Well, the other ones might not have been as right wing, or tied to the same forces among us circle.
I thought it might have been like, you know, killing two birds with one stone. So
Well, she did know things. I mean, you know, maybe they feared that she would talk talk. I mean, you know, afterwards. I don't know. Maybe, I mean, maybe if they left her alive, she'd realize, hey, they set this deal up. I mean, if they had killed Kennedy and left her alive, she might not have gone along. I don't know, you know. But I think they did it in a clever way so that Kennedy would never tell the truth about it.
John, what's your take on Watergate's secret agenda?
Hold on one second. Joe, what's the score?
Russ Baker's yes, as long as it's.
Well, what about Valentine right now?
Valentine is good, but I need Carl.
Well, where's he?
He's coming.
Okay.
I had to get him.
So, sorry, go ahead.
The book Secret Agenda, what's your take on that?
You're talking about Jim Hogan's book?
Yeah.
I think Jim Hogan's a pretty good investigative reporter, and I think that he tried to do a book later with Leonard Garment about who Deep Throat was, and he got it right. But when he presented it to Garment, who's one of the White House plumber lawyers, he said, oh, no, my wife thinks it's someone else, and then Hogan pulled out of the book deal, even though they had all this evidence showing that William Bennett, from the Utah Bennett Mormon family, you know, there in Utah, and the senator from Utah, his son, who worked at Mullen and Associates that hired Hunt, and Hunt got all the equipment for the Watergate operation out of Mullen. And this was the guy that's really deep throat. It's not Mark Felt. Mark Felt was not in a position to do it, but about 6 months before the Mark Felt story broke, there was a story saying that Woodard and Bernstein had learned that Deep Throat was very sick and near to death, and when he died, they were going to reveal the identity. And then I knew that, and Felt wasn't sick at that point, you know, and I just knew they were going to throw us a bone. They were tired of being asked about it and denying it, so they were going to give us somebody. And so Felt was so out of it and addled by that point that he was just saying, you know, oh, yeah, I was Deep Throat, and then the next day he'd say, oh, I wasn't Deep Throat. But then the cropper for me was the next series of lies about who outed Valerie Plame, and it was not Scooter Libby. And Scooter Libby had written to and interviewed with this woman, Judith Miller, who was a hack selling the Iraq War and the right-wing politics for the New York Times. And then Judith Miller went to jail saying that she wouldn't reveal her source, even though Scooter had written her a letter saying it was all right to reveal his name as a source, but he wasn't the person, and she wasn't protecting him. She was protecting the real person that did the leak. And the real purpose for the leak was covered up. Even this new Sean Penn movie doesn't get at the purpose. It wasn't to get even with Joe Wilson. And it was to compromise her position. Her job in the CIA was that she had a human intelligence network worldwide that was feeding information back about these terrorist groups and whether they were trying to get weapons of mass destruction, nuclear weapons, nuclear fuel, or, you know, stuff that they could make nuclear bombs with. And it was an effective network. It was breaking a lot of them down. So by outing her, I mean, not killing her, outing her, it compromised that entire network, and a lot of those people were killed. And all of that information that they had was just destroyed.
And they would destroy the information so that they get more terrorist attacks?
Somebody's covering for all these terrorists on some level. They go in and out of prison, and they're, you know, I mean, but not only did she die, so did John O'Neill, who had covered the Blind Sheikh 1993 tower bombing people and knew their whole history here in the United States. And he's dumped out of the FBI on this phony charge of losing his secure computer. 2 other agents grabbed it out of a meeting and left with it without telling him they were leaving, you know. And so he didn't really lose it, but he wasn't in control of it because he went out to make a phone call, and then they screwed him. So he gets dumped in the FBI, and then Frasca from the Radical Terrorism Unit, who's also the guy that skewers the Moussaoui tap and the FISA thing, Frasca tells him there's a nice job over at the Twin Towers. So his first day on work as security at the Twin Towers, he dies in the collapse. And then the third person that knew about the terrorist networks internally, domestically, was a counterterrorism expert that was tracking all of them in the United States named Linda Franklin. And she was the top counterterror person of the FBI. And she dies in a murder that they never even did any ballistics on. They never did any investigation of, because it was one of a series of killings supposedly by the Beltway sniper. But Mueller and the other cops don't come to her funeral. It's only her family and friends at the funeral. I mean, the FBI like to come out, you know, fallen soldier, you know. and there's nothing. And so all her knowledge is then destroyed. So you're basically compromising all of those information flows about who the terrorists are by doing this. You know, whoever's doing it, but I'm just saying that that's the effect. But Valerie Plame was outed by Kenneth Mellman, who went on to, you know, run Bush's election and head of the Republican National Committee, but he's never named, and that's who's protecting. So when they have, and Judith Miller goes to jail for 8 months not to reveal who it is, and then gets out, and they have a whistleblower award, National Hero Award for Mark Felt, because he was deep throat and exposed Watergate. You know, and, you know, the whole story was hokey anyway. I mean, Bob Woodward, Naval Intelligence, is still doing their game, you know, but he's now the national hero, and so the award is presented to him as this national thing by who? Judith Miller. So one set of lies, you know, the operatives in one covert operation cover for the others, and they give each other awards.
And the real deep throat guy is still alive?
Bennett, I don't know if he's still living, but he was the son at that time of the, so he may still be. I think he went into office out in William Bennett, and he was the son of the Utah senator. He's also, Mullen did the PR for the Mormon Tabernacle Choir and that Mormon Mafia that was running Howard Hughes, and Ken Mellman, yeah, that's him. Kenneth Mellman, yeah. So, you know, they give us fake scandals, they give us fake solutions, you know, I mean, and it's a nice news game, but it's not much more than that.
It says he's gay. I mean, why does it seem that
He can get in the military pretty soon.
JFK case, there's several gay folks, and
Yeah, I think he did. He's like with the log cabin
it says
Republicans
gay
or
and
something.
Jewish.
Gay and Jewish. I don't know whether either of those things have anything. I mean, when people say like, "Oh, J. Edgar Hoover was gay," I said, "Look, if the crimes of the ruling class was who they slept with and what they put in their mouth, we'd be in good shape." Not an issue to me, but but there is a strain of people that do covert things, and they actively recruited gays in British intelligence. Like a lot of those big World War II spies, you know, and Graham Greene and, you know, that whole circle, even the Russian defectors, were gay circles out of the Oxford and the Cambridge because they already led a double life. They already knew how to keep a secret.
Or bisexuals.
Yeah.
I mean, you can slip, you know, from one bed to another to,
You can date the whole phone book.
yeah, you can, you know, you need a place to hide, go to
Oh,
the
there you go.
house. And there's your hot place to hide.
Well, it's just a good recruiting tool. I don't know how much it has to do with anybody's, you know, mentality is all.
Yeah, it was an old movie, the guy was trying to kill the Gaul, remember that movie? The guy was a jackal.
They had a jackal, yeah.
He was bisexual, and he would hide with his dates, he would
No.
pick up, so that they'd never be a hotel trail.
Yeah.
It was a good idea, actually.
If you can get dates. So. But somebody asked me a little earlier, how did Mae Brussel get started? She was really my mentor. I mean, I started doing research earlier than I knew of her, but I was already fairly deep into it when her first article was printed in The Realist that I used to subscribe to, called "Why Was Martha Mitchell Kidnapped?" that broke down the entire command structure of Watergate that wouldn't come out for 2 or 3 years, you know, and also had a little trailer on the end about how Nixon came to power and his connections with the Nazis. And I was already tracking the Nazis in covert operations, so I got in touch with it. But she started back in '63, and she was a housewife of a doctor, living a fairly good lifestyle. She was, her father was Rabbi Magnin, one of the leading Reform rabbis in Los Angeles, and pretty famous. He got on Johnny Carson and stuff. And she had gone to study architecture. She liked Frank Lloyd Wright at Stanford, and she married this doctor, and they were living in a nice house up in the hills above Carmel by the sea. And she had 5 kids, but at that point, I don't think they were all born yet, but her daughter Bonnie was 5 at that point. And she liked Kennedy, and she saw Kennedy killed, and then her daughter Bonnie was watching the TV that weekend and saw Oswald brought out, beat up, and went in her room and wrapped her teddy bear up to send Ali Harvey Oswald, which I think shows some amazed kind of compassion about the world. But then the daughter came out after wrapping the teddy bear and saw Oswald shot on television, and May thought, what kind of a world am I bringing my kids into? And so she started doing her clips and her research, and she found other people. And a lot of the beginnings of this research, it's not really acknowledged too much, but it should be, was women. Maggie Fields, Lillian Castellano, Mae Brussel, Sylvia Marr, and they were...
Had a radio show in California.
Yeah, she eventually did a radio show called World Watchers, 853, and you can get all of them now for about $50 on DVDs, and believe me, it's worth it. It's a treasure trove of information. What she was talking about when she died at the end of the 80s is still coming true. She predicted Reagan, coming into the presidency. She handed Rose, 10 years ahead, she handed Rose Kennedy a note 5 days before Bobby was killed and said the people that killed John are moving on your son in California. Because she was tracking them. She cross-referenced indexed the entire Warren Commission volumes. 8,000 pages. And, she understood who they were, and she was watching where they went, and tracking them. So she would break the news down every week in these shows. She called it World Watchers. She wanted to be like Weight Watchers. She thought other wives, housewives, would clip their papers and send her stuff, and it would be this network of sort of coffee klatch conspiracy mavens. But that never materialized. But she did get on radio, and she did eventually make tapes each week. She'd send out with a sheet. But she's just, I wouldn't say she's right about absolutely everything, but she was light years ahead of most people, and clipped 15 newspapers a day, 150 periodicals a month, and read 500 to 700 books a year, and broke all that information down. And I don't hold a candle to her, but I try to keep up, in terms of the reading. But she was brilliant, and she made the connections. And she used to say, people say I'm crazy. What they mean is I'm crazy to talk about it. And she said that she got so much vilification for talking about conspiracy. She said, well, I shouldn't do this. She said, I should say that I'm a psychic, and then everyone will love me. I'll predict Mary Jo Kopechne getting killed, and then they'll love me because I did, and I'll be like Gene Dixon.
Right.
Because Gene Dixon predicted the assassinations, all three of the major assassinations, John F., Robert F. Kennedy. And I used to go and get the Weekly World News each year, and especially at the end of the year, where they would predict what was happening in the coming year, and I'd put it away and take it out at the end of the next year and buy the new one, put it away, and then I'd look back, and consistently there were certain psychics that were predicting all of the covert operations and the assassinations, and were obviously being handed the information. They fed it through Milt Caniff from Air Force Intelligence, would write stuff about the, well, he started with tearing the pirates, so before you'd go into Burma, he'd be there, and he'd be in Vietnam, and then you'd go to Vietnam, and so fighting the Dragon Lady, but he was always pumping out information. And then one time he came home, and the Dayton Daily News covered him, and he said he had to cancel a whole strip and start a new one. It wasn't easy because you have to get way ahead of it, and he had to do all this extra work. And they said, well, why did you cancel the strip? And he said, well, it was a story I had about a young woman who was the daughter of a publishing figure on the West Coast being kidnapped by radicals, and I didn't want to embarrass the Hearst family when it came out. But obviously he'd been given the story, so it preconditions acceptance. And when something happens, you say, "Oh, that's what Gene Dixon said would happen," and it gives them a way to trial balloon things and put them out there without being official sources. They have novels that do that. They have movies that do that. And plant the stories. But you could see them, but May used to tease that way, and say that I should be a psychic, then they'd love me. But,
You might have to go through the phone.
Okay.
He's doing everything right on his end. And
Nothing's showing up.
Nothing's showing up on
well,
his end.
let's put them in. Is there enough charge
He's
on
on the
it?
line.
Okay. Hi, Doug. It's John Judge. Yeah. I think since we're having so much technical difficulty getting you up on Ustream, we'll just have you talk to people through this phone into the microphone, if that's all right. And at the end, I can repeat their questions to you, and you can answer, and people will be able to hear you. But we can't yet see you. If you want to keep, the connection up, and you happen to come up while we're doing it, we'll switch over to that. But is that all right? Can you just do the talk? Yeah, right where you are, and I'll put it on speaker, and then everybody here can hear it. I already introduced you, but we're just taking too much time trying to get your signal up. All right.
Sometimes, and other times.
Everybody's here, sitting, waiting for your image to come up, so you can start in 2 seconds. I just have to get Joe to turn this on speaker. So hold that half a second.
Yes.
Now, is this on?
Just tell him yes.
Doug Valentine.
Yes?
Doug Valentine.
Doug Valentine.
Yes, go ahead and start.
Go ahead and start.
Put it to the ear. Put it to the
No.
ear.
Hello, John. I know you folks have been having some technical difficulties today, and I feel bad about that, but it's certainly, nevertheless, quite an honor to be able to speak tonight to such a well-informed and curious audience. I hope that in the next couple of minutes makes something of a difference. I would like to talk today about the impact of the Federal Bureau of Narcotics, what I'll call the FBN. What the FBN played in some of the events surrounding the assassination of JFK. And I'd like to suggest, and try to show how it might have been possible that an assassin might have moved in and out of position in Dallas as part of a drug smuggling network that was protected to some extent by the CIA and certain leading FBN agents. And I'd also like to raise the possibility that an assassin, that the assassin could have been a double agent who had penetrated one of the protected networks that made its way into Dallas. So let me begin by pointing out that spies and drug smugglers and federal narcotic agents have one thing in common that's very important. They all assume false identities, smuggle illegal items across borders, and they are also experts in avoiding and corrupting police and security officers. So, and I'd like to give you a little relevant history just to set the stage for what I'm going to say. In America, spies and drug smugglers have worked together as a matter of official but unstated policy since World War II, when the military hired mafiosos all around the country to ferret out Nazi saboteurs along the coastline, as well as to prevent labor strikes along the waterfront. Meyer Lansky and Lucky Luciano made the deal with the military, and later in the war, the mafia worked with U.S. intelligence in Italy and France and just about every other place around the world. Criminology professor Alan Block, who some of you may be familiar with, has asserted that this so-called Luciano project marked a turning point in America's political history in which professional criminals continued to ply their trade but for new patrons. And those new patrons were America's master spies, people like CIA counterintelligence chief James Angleton. So this is a very big deal. But keep in mind that the drug smugglers and assassins in the underworld may also be double agents working for enemy intelligence services, and Angleton certainly always considered this. So I believe, and I'll try to show why, some of the secrecy surrounding the JFK assassination has a lot to do with covering up this unholy alliance between America's top drug smugglers, politicians, and spies. And I'll give you some more history that's relevant to events in Dallas and why I feel this way. Okay. U.S. government protection of drug traffickers began long before the CIA existed. Started in 1926, the government secretly protected the drug trafficking Chinese nationalists because, of course, the nationalists were fighting the communist Chinese, and America always supports anybody who's fighting the communists. In the 1930s and 40s, several very important FBN agents knew that the Chinese nationalists that their heroin was entering the U.S. through ports in Galveston, Tampa, New Orleans, San Francisco, and New York, as well as overland from Mexico into Texas. But for many reasons, they just stood back and watched. More reasons than I can get into now. The mafia got involved in this Chinese nationalist protected drug network in 1939, just a little bit before the Luciano project started up. When Meyer Lansky sent his confidential agent, Virginia Hill, to Mexico, where she famously seduced a number of top Mexican politicians, army officers, diplomats, and police officials, and brought them into this mafia drug network. Virginia Hill built a nightclub in Nuevo Laredo and started smuggling heroin into Texas with a woman named Dr. Margaret Chung. Very important. Dr. Chung was a member of drug smuggling hit St. Tom, which was pretty much the outlet for Chinese nationalist heroin in the United States. And she was also the attending physician to the Flying Tiger, which was the private airline that the government formed to fly supplies for the Chinese nationalists. Okay, so the Flying Tigers were the parent of the CIA drug smuggling airline Air America, which JFK had a lot of problems with. And by 1950, the CIA was underwriting both the Chinese nationalist drug smugglers as well as working with the drug smuggling Mexican intelligence service, the CSS, which Professor Peter Dale Scott has written a lot about recently. Okay, so leading FBI agents knew that Dr. Chung was trafficking in San Francisco, New Orleans, New York, and Chicago, and they watched her for years, but they never made an arrest. They looked away, not only because the nationalists were fighting the communists, but because by the 1950s, federal and local police forces were allowing the mafia to distribute drugs to the black community in the United States for purposes of political repression. So you have to always remember, the war on drugs is an instrument of political repression, just like the assassination of John Kennedy can be seen in the context of that of political repression as well. And the assassins who serve the elite, the national security elite who run the country as instruments of political repression, these assassins are often bred in that dark corner of the underworld where spies and drug smugglers mingle. And I'll tell you a little bit about that. This is where it gets more relevant. Through the 1950s and 1960s, a few winning FBI agents naturally assumed a central role as intermediaries between the CIA and the drug smuggling underworld assassins. One of these FBI agents was Charlie Siragusa. And in 1960, when CIA officer Bill Harvey was looking for someone, later codenamed QJ Wynn, to recruit assassins for the CIA, FBI agent Charlie Siragusa appeared at the top of Bill Harvey's list. Siragusa was an expert on Corsican and Sicilian assassins, and Corsicans were recommended, Harvey said, because Sicilians could lead to the mafia, which again brings us back to the connections the CIA had with the mafia through the Luciano project. Why would the CIA want to hire Corsicans in order to protect the drug smuggling mafioso in its employ? That's the question that rises from Harvey wanting Corsican. And of course, the answer that comes to mind is that the CIA was planning assassinations in the United States. And Corsicans would be less likely to be tracked back to the CIA than mafioso. Okay, so the person chosen for the QJ Wynn job was a drug smuggler. And QJ Wynn, the recruiter of the assassin. And the person chosen for that QJ Wynn job was a drug smuggler who worked for the SBN in Luxembourg in the 1950s. In 1962, the CIA quashed drug smuggling charges brought against this guy, QJ Wynn, so he would be free to arrange the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. So the CIA, by 1962, is using drug smugglers brought to his attention by the FBI in political assassination. I'll give you another example of how this works. There is evidence to indicate that Harold Nelson, a big-time drug smuggler and a major player in the protected Mexican drug network I mentioned above, was probably very likely another assassin the CIA tried to recruit through the FBI. Back in the 1940s, the FBI knew that Nelson traveled regularly between Mexico City, Cuba, and Hong Kong, and in 1951, FBI agents arrested him and sent him to prison. After he got out of prison, Meltzer settled in Los Angeles. And in November 1960, someone, almost certainly FBI agent George White, who some of you are probably familiar with, put Meltzer in touch with Johnny Roselli. And in December 1960, the CIA, through Roselli, asked Meltzer to join an assassination team. So again, another example of the CIA actually using the FBI agents to reach out to assassins for some kind of work that nobody, I'm sure, knows all the assassinations that they conducted, but the facts are there that they're doing this. Okay, now it's also significant in terms of the Kennedy assassination that FBI agents George White and Charlie Siracusa both provided cover for the CIA MK-Ultra drug testing program, which had, as one of its aims, creating push-button assassins who possessed no memory of the deed. In the summer of 1960, the CIA directed FBI agent Charlie Siracusa to open an MK-Ultra safe house in New York City. And soon after that, they asked him to recruit an assassination squad. This is documented fact. The CIA was offering $1 million per hit. The CIA also asked FBI agent Siracusa to set up a detective agency as the front for illegal CIA operations in America. Siracusa said he refused to do either of these things, and that may be true, but certainly other people like Guy Bannister, for example, were certainly willing to play along. I don't know that Bannister did exactly, but he seems to me like a person that would have. I should also note that the CIA used these SBN safe houses to get politicians high on drugs. And so there were prostitutes, some who were probably intelligence agents. And a person like Ellen Ronstadt comes to mind. And the CIA also used these MK-Ultra safe houses to accommodate its drug smuggling assets from around the world, from the Far East, from Panama, Corsicans, a lot. These are places where drug smugglers can stay for free without anybody knowing they're in the country. Okay, so by 1960, unwitting FBI agents who weren't working for the CIA, were increasingly making cases on Corsicans linked to the French intelligence service and its rival, the secret army organization, the OAN, as well as the CIA. This too leads up to Dallas. A well-known fact is that one Corsican the FBI arrested in 1960 named labor leader Irving Brown as an accomplice. The unwitting FBI agents found in their investigation that Brown was a CIA agent and that he had port privileges in New York, meaning that his baggage was never checked by customs. And they also found out that he frequently traveled with a Corsican drug smuggler named Maurice Castellani. The CIA notably shut down the FBI's investigation of CIA agent Brown and Castellani, who he was traveling with. They certainly knew everything that was going on with these people. Then in 1962, unwitting FBI agents, those not working for the CIA, arrested Castellani's partner, a Corsican smuggler named Francois Scaglio. But Scaglio's controller in this operation, a Frenchman using the alias Jean Morin, escaped. And I can't get into all the details, but he never should have. It's almost as if he was allowed to escape. I believe through years and years of researching all this, that John Morin very likely was Michel Victor Mertz, a SEDEC agent who managed a heroin network between France and New York with Santo Trafficante Jr. As you all know, the CIA in 1960 hired Trafficante to assassinate Castro using MK-Ultra technology, in part developed by FBI agents working for the CIA. And once Trafficante, who was probably the biggest drug smuggler in the United States, went to work for the CIA, his drug network was protected. And that protection evidently carried over to Michel Victor Mertz, as it also did to Irving Brown and Maurice Castellani. This protected Trafficante Mertz network, drug smuggling network, reached Dallas through Trafficante's courier, Benny Individual. And again, this is a documented fact. So the question becomes, could or did the CIA use one of its protected drug networks to infiltrate an assassin into Dallas? The system was set up. We know there's protected drug networks. We know it hires assassins who are drug smugglers, and they are there. So they could have done it. And it's also possible that a drug smuggler, a professional drug trafficker, and assassin like Mertz could have infiltrated the CIA's protected drug trafficking networks and used the opportunity to carry out an assassination. In other words, the CIA could have been tricked in its own game. As someone, or all of you may know, Michel Mertz emerged as a suspect in the assassination in 1964 when the French asked the FBI to investigate reports that OAS terrorist Jean Swetre was in Dallas on November 22nd and had been expelled by the INS that very same day. Swetre was questioned and denied the charge and said that Mertz, a SEDEC agent who had infiltrated the OSF, was impersonating it. The INS agent's description somewhat fit Mertz, but no one ever compared that description to any photographs the FBI had of the mystery man from 1962, J. Morin, nor was it compared to any photographs the FBI may have had of Swetre, who allegedly was a drug trafficker as well, and had been followed for years by the FDN in Marseille. The CIA was certainly monitoring both Swetre and Mertz, so it would be impossible for them, especially counterintelligence chief James Angleton, to confuse the two. It's his job to know who these people are and what they're doing. But if, as has been alleged, Angleton was a Soviet or a Mossad mole, he could have moved an assassin into Dallas using the Brown-Castellani network I mentioned, or the overland route that had been established in 1939, the nationalist Chinese one, that moved from Mexico into Texas overland, or he could have used the Mertz Trafficante Individual route into Dallas. So all these things are possible. And through MK-Ultra, Angleton, the central figure in all this, could have used Jack Ruby to assassinate the designated patsy Lee Harvey Oswald. And here again, witting FBI agents who are virtually absent from any investigation that anybody ever did into the assassination. These FBI agents potentially play a critical role. They worked for the CIA, protecting its drug smugglers, recruiting its assassins, and staffing its MK Ultra safe houses. The usual suspects are George White and Charlie Siragusa, also involved in the Luciano project and worked for the CIA, both were assassination experts, and both knew Angleton. White, notably, and this is just a little more history, met Santo Trafficante Sr. in September 1945, and right after that meeting, Trafficante acquired total control of the Cuba to Tampa drug connection. And in 3 weeks after that meeting, George White became the FBN supervisor in Chicago, where, at the same time, Guy Bannister was a senior FBI agent. In 1946 in Chicago, FBI agent George White obtained none other than Jack Ruby as an informant. Okay, the Chicago mob sent Ruby to Dallas in 1947. And in the 1952, FBI agent White, Jack Ruby briefed the COPA committee about organized crime in Chicago on the one condition that the committee stay away from Dallas. And the committee went along with that. And I believe that White and all the committee members agreed to stay out of Dallas to protect the CIA, nationalist Chinese mafia drug operation out of Mexico into Texas, Azuero. Ruby, and again, this is documented fact, was a small part of this protected drug route. And by 1958, the FBN, the part of it that's not connected with the CIA, had established that Ruby's boss, Joe Civillo, ran the heroin business in Dallas. In 1958, the FBN linked Civillo to Trafficante and described Civillo as Carlos Marcello's deputy in Dallas. And yet the Warren Commission found no significant link between Ruby and organized crime. Again, I believe, at least partially to deflect attention from the CIA's connection to all the drug smuggling that was going on. Again, this is why the FBN, the Bureau of Narcotics, is like the one element that never gets brought up in the assassination. Nobody wanted it to track back to the CIA, protected drug routes and assassins and all that stuff. Obviously, there were compartments within the FBN. For example, Marie Brown, the FBN supervisor in Dallas on November 22nd, 1963, said to me that he knew nothing about the mafia in Dallas, and he insisted to me that Ruby was not an FBN informant. Okay. But FBN headquarters in Washington had a file which Secret Service Chief James Rowley requested on November 25th, 1963. Ruby's file was given to Rowley, but he never returned it. Likewise, the file on Jack Ruby in the New York office went missing after the assassination. And again, I believe in both cases it's because Ruby was George White's secret informant, but in White's capacity as a CIA agent, not as an FBN agent. The one thing that I think is most important about this is I interviewed an old FBN agent who later became a DEA inspector named Richard Salmi. In 1978, Salmi was part of a joint CIA DEA investigation of MK Ultra. Salmi told me that he found evidence that George White had used Ruby to kill Oswald. And I wrote about this in my latest book. Salmi said that he was told by his CIA bosses on this victims task force not to tell Senator Ted Kennedy about his finding. Senator Kennedy had generated this victims task force investigation into MK Ultra. Salmi told me that he had also found evidence that JFK had used the New York MK Ultra safe house to compromise his political enemies, and that is why Senator Kennedy agreed to censor his report, which is not part of, obviously, the uncensored part is not a part of the official records. And as far as I know, Salvi never told this to anybody. I can't prove it, but he did tell me. Another little known fact about the FBI, right after the assassination, Mexican officials intercepted a call to Havana from the Cuban embassy in Mexico City. The Cubans were allegedly claiming credit for the JFK assassination, but instead of telling the FBI or the CIA, they told the FBI agent in charge of Mexico City, a guy named William Durkin. Durkin called FBI headquarters in Washington, which relayed this particular piece of information to, again, Secret Service Chief Rowley, at which point the theory that Castro had arranged the JFK assassination began to emerge as a viable alternative to the lone nut theory. You folks will know much more about this than I do. There may have been other reports coming in about this, but it did come in through the FBI as well. So there are lots of dots to connect that connect the FBI to the assassination of John Kennedy. And the last one, the one last thing I'd like to say is that before closing, so I'd like to remind you that Rose Sherman predicted JFK was going to be killed. Sherman was a drug addict and a prostitute working for Ruby, I believe, and she heard of this assassination plot while she was traveling from Florida with two men who were Italians or resembled Italian. The men were taking her to Dallas to obtain money to buy heroin from a seaman. The seaman was to meet them in Houston after disembarking in Galveston. The customs agent in Galveston verified that the seaman was being investigated for drug smuggling, and the Coast Guard confirmed that it was interested in the ship. But the seaman, like Moran in 1962, got away, and when asked by the House Select Committee on Assassination, customs officials said that neither the agent nor his reports could be found. You may not know this, but in 1963, November of 1963, approximately 20 CIA officers were in Texas and Florida operating under customs cover as part of a special unit organized in Houston to penetrate anti-Castro terrorist groups in the United States. Any one of these 20 CIA agents, posing as customs officials, could have facilitated the movements of the seaman, with or without realizing that the seaman may have been an assassin. So that's yet another potential drug-connected route that an assassin could have used to get into the country. And that takes up all my time before I can even touch on the army of CIA-protected Cuban drug traffickers associated with the assassination. People like Orlando Cubella, Trafficante associate who enjoyed diplomatic immunity and could travel without his luggage being checked. Cubella traveled between Spain, France, Mexico, Paris, and New York, all major transit points in the illicit drug trade. And again, a lot of you probably know, on November 21st, 1963, in Paris, CIA officials Desmond Fitzgerald, who replaced Harvey, and Cubella, an MK-Ultra 10 loaded with poison. A pen that has been tested in San Francisco by FBI agent George White and was rigged with a hypodermic needle designed specifically for assassination. So there's just a lot of it going on, a lot of connections between the FBI and assassination, and I believe the assassination of John Fitzgerald Kennedy. So if any of you have any questions, I'm probably a lot to digest, but I'm here and I'm glad to answer them.
We're pretty much at the end of the time we can have you do. I could take one question, but that, I mean, we're already running over.
Okay.
One question? Okay. Nobody's got their hand up, so thank you so much, and I'll let you hear what they thought of you. Sorry, say it again.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.